Hi, I'm James McGuire, editor-in-chief of eWEEK, and today we're talking about the future of artificial intelligence in the enterprise. Certainly an emerging technology that faces some big challenges, but also offers huge rewards. To discuss that, I'm joined by a very special guest. With me is Manuvir, head of enterprise computing at NVIDIA. Manuvir, very glad to have you with us today.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here.
And I've heard your schedule is particularly busy these days. You're on planes, you're going back and forth from coasts. I think they have you working pretty hard from what I hear.
Well, the secret of it is, everything's virtual these days, but
Right.
when you record things for the virtual events, you still have to be in the right places to do a great job in the recordings, and that's really what's keeping me on planes. Yeah.
And also, you've got an interesting background. I know that you haven't been with NVIDIA an enormous amount of time. You were with Microsoft. Please tell me a little about that, if you would.
James, I spent 15 years growing up at Microsoft, where one of the things I did was I was part of the original team that created Azure, Microsoft's cloud platform. So I'm very much a cloud first person by background. And I also spent a few years at EMC and Dell EMC, providing enterprise grade storage to enterprise customers. So I'm very familiar with enterprise customers and what makes them successful. And that is the reason why Jensen brought me to NVIDIA, because he really felt that NVIDIA was ready to make a broader push into the enterprise.
Interesting. Okay. Well, let's talk about, I've got some questions about some NVIDIA's work in making AI mainstream, but first let's get an overall portrait of where we are with artificial intelligence. I think that a lot of executives see it as absolutely necessary. I mean, they want to invest in it. They know they need to invest in it, but I think there's a certain amount of frustration in some instances. It's been like an expensive science experiment. They put money into it. Maybe they haven't got as much out of it as they hope to. And certainly AI deployment is still fairly minor. Would you agree with that assessment, or where do you see the state of AI these days?
Yes, James, I think that's a fair statement. I think the potential of AI in the enterprise is far greater than the reality today. And the reason for that primarily is that AI is difficult. It's not easy to implement for a customer. And so the successes we've had, yes, it's true, we have thousands of companies that are doing AI in some form or fashion, but typically it is because, number one, they have a set of data scientists who know what they're doing. And number two, they have overcome the implementation challenges in order to get the result because they were so keen on getting the result. But for a typical enterprise customer that's kind of on the fence of should I go ahead, not go ahead, it's been quite challenging because it's difficult to operationalize, right? And so this is a big area of focus for us. Yes.
You mentioned, some of the companies have the data scientists they need. Is lack of personnel one of the big stumbling blocks to getting AI up and working,
I
or not
think
necessarily?
Not necessarily, James. I think the real stumbling block when we talk to our customers is there are two worlds in a company. There's the world of the data scientists who are familiar with all the tools and they can produce AI models and all of that. But then when these things have to be used in production for some use case in the company, now the people who deploy applications in production, IT, for example, are used to a very different world, right? Where they get validated software from an SAP or VMware, they test it for 6 months, deploy it. Here's a new model I generated. It looks pretty good. Can you deploy this one, right? Which is a very unnatural thing for production IT to deal with. So the real issue is you've got these two sets of people in the same company that don't quite know how to work together. And our focus at NVIDIA, along with the ecosystem, is the way to solve this problem is to create the tooling and the end-to-end workflow so that the R&D team can produce their output in a way that the IT team can just consume, right? That's sort of the missing part of the puzzle. You can think of it as MLOps, or you can think of it like what's the operating system for AI, what's the toolkit for end-to-end AI, right? To take it from research to production.
Interesting. Well, on that same note, what about NVIDIA's work with VMware to bring AI to mainstream data servers? I mean, what are the details on that one?
Yeah, so we're very excited about this work, James, and it really goes to the point that I just made, because if you think about it, IT departments at enterprise customers today are very familiar with VMware. And it's sort of almost the de facto standard where basically what you say is I've got servers racked in my data center, and on these servers, I can run a variety of workloads that are certified and validated. People run a lot of SAP, for example, VMware, and it's all certified and validated. And then the second thing that IT does with VMware is they basically do private cloud, which is to say that they have a self-service catalog, and any user from the company can come on board and click on the catalog and say, I want to get a VM that looks like this, right? Just like you would do in the cloud. So these are the two use cases for VMware. And so what we've done working with them is we produced a software package. It's called NVIDIA AI Enterprise. It's a complete coherent package for AI. We've certified it with VMware's toolkit, with vSphere, with Tanzu, right? And so now you can do two things. Number one, as an IT administrator, I can extend my catalog to include VM templates for people who want to do AI. I'm a data scientist. I want to run a Jupyter notebook. I want to do process board, something like that. And I just click on the catalog and I just spin up VMs in this infrastructure to do that. Or alternatively, AI workflows can now run in parallel alongside other workloads on the same servers, right? So those are the two use cases we're enabling, and it's really meant to lower the barrier to entry for the next wave of enterprise customers and to make AI production ready, because that's what we need to do to get to the next wave of customers.
You know, it's interesting, you know, there's a lot of talk these days about low code and no code, and it's a very fashionable idea. Is that idea of the VMware, the template, the model makes AI slightly low code or no code, or is that not, that analogy not work at all?
I would use the analogy in a different way, which is that AI is the ultimate no code solution. Because if you think about what AI does, right? It's really two steps. The first step is I take some input data and I use it to generate a model, right? And input data, if you go back to the earliest examples of vision, it's like, I'll show you 100 photos and I'll tell you which ones have a cat in them and which one don't. And then the model will learn from that. And I've got a model. But the model is nothing but a piece of software. And then you embed that in your application. And when you run your application, it calls into the model and says, here's the next picture. Is it a cat or is it a dog, right? So that whole model is generated automatically, not by a human, but it's actually part of your application software, right? So it's the ultimate no code software, right? And then the beauty of it, James, is that as you keep improving the model, right, you get new data and the model learns more and becomes better. Effectively, your application became better without any human developer having to create a new version, right? That's the analogy I would draw, right? That the power of AI is there's only so many software developers in the world. You can only write so much software at a time. But with AI and this process, you can generate new software for new use cases all the time, completely automatically. Right?
Interesting. You know, in terms of other new developments, there's the idea of the DPU in the data center, the data programming unit. Explain to me, is that related to the AI initiative? Or is that a different idea?
It's fundamentally a different idea, but of course it does connect with AI. So this is the data processing unit. And the fundamental idea here, James, is that every server today has a network interface card, which controls all the traffic, that all the bits that move between one server and the other, right? And what we're doing here with the data processing unit is on that same network interface card, we've now put a CPU, okay, which is capable of more computation. And so what you can do now is, as the traffic is flowing through the network in and out of the server, you can monitor the traffic, you can inspect it, you can block things that need to be blocked, right? So it opens up a whole set of use cases, for example, for security, where you can watch all the packets that are going through. And whenever you see a pattern that looks unusual, you know there's probably somebody's hacked your network and you can block it right away, right? So that's one major value of the DPU. The other value is, if you think about servers now and server virtualization, James, the reason why hypervisors became so prevalent and virtualization with VMware was because the insight was I can take one physical server and I can slice it up into pieces different applications, right? Utilization and saving money for customers. Well, now we've come to the point where there is so much functionality in the hypervisor. There is so much work that is being done by the operating system that is consuming the CPU that it's occupying the capacity that the workloads really need, right? And so the other value of the DPU is to take that functionality of the hypervisor and move it from the CPU to the DPU. Then you feed the CPU and you can do your workloads and you need less servers again. Right? So there's two values. One is this offloading value, and then the other is the security value. So that's why we think the DPU is crucial.
What about NVIDIA's work to simplify artificial intelligence with developer resources, including there's an SDK, there's pre-trained models and more, including conversational AI? What's the update on that?
Yeah, there's a pretty well-defined recipe for AI. Again, it's 4 steps. I get the data and I prepare it. Second
Right.
step is I feed the data into my training system so I get a model. Third step is I simulate it or validate the model. And the fourth is I put it in production, right? And then it all
Okay.
flows back because I get media. This is kind of a recipe. And what we've done at NVIDIA to simplify the world for developers is for a variety of use cases, like you said, conversational AI, we built frameworks using this recipe. So we have a framework called Jarvis for conversational AI. We have a framework for Metropolis for vision, right? And we publish these frameworks so that developers don't have to repeat all this work. So you just take the framework, you build on top of it, and now you build your unique application for the particular thing you're trying to do, but the framework is already built for you, right? So that's sort of where we are. We've got a range of frameworks and for a variety of use cases. And the way we go about it, James, is we see from customers where the greatest need is, where the biggest use cases are, and we keep adding one framework after the other for each of these use cases.
So it really makes the deployment of AI easier because this is a pre-built system. Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Let's look into the future of artificial intelligence, specifically AI in the enterprise. I mean, I saw one statistic where something like only 6% of companies have successfully deployed it. So I don't know if it's quite mainstream yet. I'm wondering if there's a year you think, when will enterprise AI be all the way mainstream? Would that be like 2023, 2025? I mean, what's your prediction on that?
Yeah, I think we're pretty optimistic, James. So definitely, I think it's coming. We already see the movement happening. But I would say this, right? And part of the reason for that is if you look at our own information or the studies you see from other organizations that track enterprise customers, there's a lot of appetite, right? You'll find a very high percentage of enterprise customers say that they have the intent to adopt AI in the next year or two, but they've been blocked by a couple of things, right? And so what we've really focused on is very quickly unblocking those things. So let me tell you about a couple of things we've done to unblock, right?
Sure.
The first is that the hardware, the systems that people have been using for AI have been primarily these big servers, expensive servers, they're bespoke, they're special things, you put them in a corner of a data center. Right. Whereas what we have done over the last year is we've worked with all the OEMs, the big and small across the globe, to put our hardware into the smallest form factors, into 1U servers, 2U servers, the kinds that are racked and stacked in data centers every day, right? That's a huge part of the mainstreaming. The way I put it is, instead of having to get like the Land Rover server to do AI, can I get a mini SUV, right?
Okay. Yeah. I like that.
And sometimes I take it to the grocery store and I need the space in the trunk. And other times I bring something else and I don't need the space in the trunk, right? And that's kind of the model. It's like on a laptop, you have a GPU in your PC and laptop today, and sometimes you use the GPU and sometimes you don't. And we just think we're now get to the point where every server in the data center just has a affordable, lightweight GPU in it, and then you can do the AI very naturally and seamlessly, right? So that was the one thing. And then the second thing was I referred to NVIDIA AI Enterprise, which is a software package, right? Which makes it supported, enterprise grade, all the ilities that enterprise customers need in their software. Whereas up till now, I think AI software has been a little more, it's all open source, it's all DIY, and you got to assemble stuff. I think for enterprise customers, it's more important to have ready solutions, trustable solutions. And so we've really worked hard on those two things. And so with that, we really feel that the next wave, we're sort of ready to serve the next wave now, right? And so we're pretty optimistic about what's going to transpire in the next few years.
So you're not even saying, hey, 2025, you're saying we're pretty much ready now. If you're ready, we're ready. Is that's definitely an optimistic view.
If you're ready, we're ready, right? If you're ready, we're ready. And like any wave, it'll have a cycle to it. But I definitely think we're ready. And if I may make one more pitch, James, the question becomes, for true democratization of AI, what is the use case that the customer will adopt, right? Like what's the first use case or whatever? And I'll give you a slightly different answer to that, right? Because up till now, our journey has been, we worked with customers who have use cases they recognize, like I need to track what's going on in my storefront, okay? Or I need a recommender system to recommend to people the next thing to buy. However, the real democratization of AI opportunity is when the enterprise customer does not even realize that they're using or adopting AI. Okay,
Ah,
I'll give you an
okay.
example of this, right? So we
Hmm.
worked with Microsoft on Office, right? Which, every enterprise company pretty much uses some
Right.
application from Office. And what
Sure.
we're working with them is basically using models, AI models within their software to do things like smart grammar correction or text prediction. You're typing part of a sentence and it suggests to you what's coming next,
Right.
right? It's the same application the customer has been using. It's just become intelligent. The customer didn't think about deploying AI. The customer
Ah,
thought about deploying the next version of Office, and it just comes with a requirement that in order to host it, your server needs to have a GPU. And
aha.
that's it, right? So that is really the true democratization of AI when it can reach every customer, right? And so we're working pretty hard on that with a wide ecosystem of software providers to sort of upgrade their software. There's a very nice analogy to this, James. We're all familiar with the graphical user interface. Every
Yes.
application has a nice interface. But if you think back to when you and I were younger, it was all command line applications, right? There was none of this. And then
Hmm.
suddenly GUI became possible. And I mean, now if you told somebody to build an application without a GUI, they'd laugh at you,
Right.
right? So the
Right.
world sort of went through that shift, right? And we see the same thing happening. We expect the same thing to happen now with AI, where applications go through this shift where they just get infused with AI, and it's kind of transparent, right? And if anybody wants the great proof point of this, it's the work we're doing with Cloudera, which is the
Hmm.
big data company, data analytics company.
Right.
They're about to launch the new version of their software. As far as the customer is concerned, nothing changed. But under the covers, it's running on GPUs. It's accelerated by GPUs by the same libraries that we have, and the product has just become better because of it.
Okay, so one last point then that the new Cloudera release will have AI capabilities that even the mid-level managers or whoever didn't specifically try to put in there. It has an AI
Exactly.
capability to it.
They're running all the same workloads and things that they were running before, but they're just getting a better result from
Hmm.
Cloudera Data
That
Platform.
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Manuvir, I think you said it. It's fascinating. I'll be very curious to see how the AI sector improves in the years ahead. Totally appreciate you sharing your expertise. Thank you very much.
I appreciate the opportunity, James. Thank you very much.